I'm thrilled to introduce Mattias Goldmann, the founder of the 2030 Secretariat and the CEO of Goldmann Green. Mr. Goldmann has earned the title of Sweden's most influential in sustainability, receiving knighthood from the French president for his exceptional climate work. A recipient of the Lobbyist of the Year award, he has served as the Chief Sustainability Officer of Europe's largest technical consultancy firm, Sweco. He has been CEO of the Sweden Green and liberal think tank Force. He is spokesperson for the Swedish Green motorist and elected for office to the Swedish Green Party. Well, you see, it's a very esteemed man I will present to you. Currently, he is residing in Bangkok. He focuses on sustainability, mobility, and the CEO of Goldmann Green and the founder and spokesperson of the 2030 Secretariat for a fossil-independent transport sector. Today, he will enlighten us with his speech that is titled 7 Deadly Sins, based on his book, Sin to Win for People, Planet and Profit, tailored specifically for the context of geothermal energy. Now, without further delay, let's give a warm welcome to Mattias Goldmann as he takes the stage.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Christina. I really feel like a rock star here. And more generally, a huge thank you to all you out there who are part of bringing sustainable, renewable energy as part of the equation and as the new normal. I am excited to share with you some ideas on how we can move further, faster together in the switch to more renewables and more specifically, a better future for geothermal energy. I will start where Christina left off. I was just at a different conference where somebody was disappointed that I didn't talk enough about myself. You didn't even introduce yourself, I was told. But now, in fact, I don't have to because Christina did that so wonderfully. And also, if by chance you want to learn more about me, well, Google is there for you. But really, the one not at all important issue of this brief session is me. The important persons here are you. The important subject ahead of us is to make a positive impact. And the positive impact I'm thinking about is that quite literally, unfortunately, the world is on fire. There is no time to waste, and we need to ensure that the Paris Agreement and the science-based targets and the decision and understanding that we need to halve emissions decade by decade will finally start happening. Of course, we're not there at all. We just had the United Nations GAP report published, which is the basis for the upcoming COP28 meeting, showing that we need to get our act together urgently, because not only do we see here and there the fires and the storms and the droughts and the floodings, but we also break the records of highest, hottest temperature ever with an alarming regularity now. It's like those records were meant to be broken, and they were meant to be broken with huge margins, but that's not at all the case. This is now becoming so scary, so that in fact the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres says that we are probably nearing the end of global warming. And a millisecond, we might think, well, that's good news. Have we found a solution? Are we all going renewable? Are we all going geothermal? No. When Guterres says that we might end the era of global warming, it's because we are probably entering the era of global boiling, which is something we cannot afford. We need to say that's not where we want to go. We're going to get our act together. We're going to switch to something more sustainable. And of course, when we say something more sustainable, top of mind for most people is solar and wind. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against solar and wind. In fact, I'm a great believer in all kinds of sustainable, renewable energy. But I don't want it to be quite as much top of mind, because that is to the detriment of other sustainable solutions, including the one that we're focusing on today, the wonderful opportunities that geothermal poses. And that is why, just like Christina mentioned, I want to go through briefly from my book, Klimatsynder, soon finally out there in English, then called Sin to Win, on how we use the 7 deadly sins. We systematically commit the 7 deadly sins in the name of combating climate change, and more specifically, as Christina mentioned, more specifically also to make sure that there's a better awareness, increased understanding, and a stronger drive for more geothermal energy. A lot of us know these 7 deadly sins because they are, in fact, much more known than wordings from the Bible or so forth. These are cross-cultural, cross-religious. Even if you feel that you're strictly not religious at all, you will resonate and relate to the 7 deadly sins across all ages, across all cultures. So let's just go for it. And I'm going to start with the first of those 7 deadly sins, with the one that I find probably the most disagreeable. We'll come to some other deadly sins that are, fairly nice. But the first one here, greed, is the one where we don't want to be. We don't want to be the greedy person in the room. And typically, over time, the environmental movement, of which I see myself as a part, has clearly not been greedy. We've been challenging greed, saying, well, maybe we should even challenge the market economy. We cannot have perpetual economic growth. We should not have quarterly economic reports. We should have less demands on companies to produce a profit and so forth. Now, I believe it's time to change that whole story and to embrace greed. And my example of that is, I believe this man might be the greediest man on the planet, Larry Fink. He's the chairman and CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock is the biggest institutional investor in the world. They've got more money than a random country like Sweden. And they are now moving that money, as Larry Fink explains in his yearly letters to all the interested parties out there. They're now moving that money from unsustainable to sustainable, from linear to circular, from fossil to renewable. And that's not because Larry woke up one morning and became an environmental climate evangelist. Far from it. It's because he's worried about if he has the money in fossil fuels, and suddenly the world just means a little bit of what we're saying with the Paris Agreement. That is going to be stranded assets, not worth much. If, on the other hand, he moves the money to solar, wind, geothermal, other sustainable solutions, he's on to a winning streak, because those are going to be the new normal, of course. So greed is now finally playing with us. And another aspect when it comes to geothermal is that there's been this understanding or misunderstanding from a lot of my environmental and climate peers that we need to combat the oil industry. I think that's probably not a winning solution. I think it's more interesting to play with the big guys than to try and challenge them. And I am so excited to see that a lot of the knowledge, tremendous experience, and hundreds of years of doing oil can now be put to good use in geothermal. It's a lot of what we see happening in geothermal is based on the knowledge from the oil industry. And that is why greed is so clearly helping us as the number one deadly sin to become more of players in terms of going for more geothermal, but also challenge us to give each and every one out there a clearer opportunity to be part of that greed. Because, for instance, this is an actual example. You can scan that QR code if you want. For instance, the solar people are very good at making each and every one of us part of the solar revolution. And I haven't as yet seen that quite as clearly on the geothermal side. That is challenge number one from the sin number one. Let's move on to a nicer sin. This is probably the nicest of the seven, the sloth deadly sin, or the laziness. Typically, the environmental movement has not at all been about laziness. The person that doesn't care about the climate is the one that can be lazy, can just take his car and go instead of walking to the public transport station, can just throw all the things in the garbage instead of sorting out the different materials and going to different places with them. It's been hard work being climate and environmental conscious. And I think that's now changing. Finally, we can use laziness to get further, faster together in terms of combating climate change. My favorite example that I think we can build on is car sharing. If you own a car, you need to take care of insuring it paying the annual taxes, paying road taxes, fueling it and refueling it. In Sweden, you even need to change from winter to summer tires and back again. You always need to wash the car, of course, find long-term parking when you're not using it, and so forth. If you're part of car sharing or carpooling, out of sight is out of mind. Car only when you want to. The rest of the time you can focus on something else, like this guy lying in the grass. And I believe that laziness can also be used for geothermal, because of course if you focus on some of the other lovely, sustainable, renewable energy sources, well, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, but geothermal is there always. So once installed, you can just relax, hang out and chill. The geothermal is going to be there for you. I think that's an underutilized deadly sin in terms of moving further, faster with geothermal. My third of the 7 deadly sins, in the rapid pace here, because I know we got lots of things on the agenda, is envy. Envy is also one of the deadly sins I don't like. I don't like to be envious of my good friend who does well in his career, or colleagues that are being promoted when I'm not, and so forth. But it's a great driving force for change. And historically, it's not been helpful for combating climate change. People were envious of the one who could afford to fly all the way to Thailand. Now that's nobody's envious of that anymore, because everybody in our context can. People were envious of the huge SUV that somebody was driving. That is also over. Now we see envy for sustainable energy, perhaps most clearly so with solar power. There are now maps, I'm sure you've seen them, on where the most adequate locations would be for solar power. And then there's other maps for PV. And then there's other maps of where the photovoltaic installations are actually taking place. And they hardly overlap. So I was asking some of these installers, how come? What are you asked when you come and you're going to install the solar panels? And they say, well, the number one question we get is, can we put them somewhere, these solar panels, so that they can be seen by the neighbors or the customers or the employees at the company? In fact, even better, can we put them somewhere so that solar lights is a little bit reflected and shines right into the eyes of my neighbors? So it's clearly an envy-driven change here, which is easier if it's something that you put on the roof than if it's something that's below ground. Something happened here in my presentation. I'm going to go straight back and show you the number 4. That's, maybe there was censorship here, because number 4 in my book is lust. And it's exciting to see that when I meet people who have my book, I ask them, did you read it? And they said, of course I read your book. And then I asked them, well, did you read all of it? And they said, I haven't found the time yet. And then I take their book and just randomly open it to see where it opens. Always the chapter of lust. That's where people go first. And in fact, one of my examples there is the car company that you see in front of you, Tesla, which is higher valued than any other car company, or higher valued than the top 5 other car companies combined, even though it produces much less cars. As you know, it always only makes electric cars since day one. It doesn't focus on climate. It doesn't focus on being electric. It focuses on lust. The 4 models that Tesla proposes for us are the S, E, X, Y. Those of you knowing cars well will see that it's not actually the E, because that was taken by Jaguar E-Type. It's the 3, but they put it as an E to get the message across that this is about lust. And when I ask Tinder, how do you get swiped in the right direction so that you get that first date? Tinder says, if you have a picture with you and a big gas-guzzling SUV, that's not going to get you that first date. If, on the other hand, you're either with a bike, running with a dog, or seen with a Tesla or some other electric car, you will get to that first date. So lust is clearly helping us now moving into more sustainable transport. And here's where I want to sort of censor myself, because I had some exciting examples about how we can use lust, but I think it's better for you to find them yourself and use this 4th of the 7 deadly sins for geothermal energy. Moving on to the 5th of the 7 deadly sins, it's one that I find hard to talk about because it's anger. And I grew up, my whole environmental consciousness started with anger. demonstrating against unsustainable energy at the age of 8 with my mom, or against animal testing at the Lund hospital in South Sweden. But then later on I thought, is this the most efficient way to be outside protesting, or can I make better use of myself being on the inside, putting on a tie and becoming Chief Sustainability Officer and all those other things that were mentioned in the beginning? So I downplayed my anger. And I think maybe a lot of us in this room did the same thing. And I think maybe we went too far. Maybe we should realize the potential of anger. And my example here is when Trump was elected, the first and hopefully the only time. When Trump was elected and left the Paris Agreement, he created a global wave of anger that was very helpful for the climate. When he left the Paris Agreement, the state of California said, we want to still be in. And of course, the Paris Agreement only allows for countries. But since we were so upset with this Trump guy, we said, all right, come on in. And we said the same to the city of New York, and we said the same to the company of General Motors and so forth. The anger that Trump digs coal and everything he was about provoked really helped the climate movement. And of course, this anger has to be directed against somebody who's bigger than you. And that is the beauty of geothermal, that most other energy sources, but particularly the fossil ones, are bigger than you. There's other causes for anger in my head, like Russia's attack on Ukraine. You will easily find a source that you can use for your anger, but make sure that the source of your anger is the Goliath and you are the David, so that you get the proportions right. And also we need to factor in that sometimes what we do, even though we strongly believe in it and know that it's sustainable and know that it's for the benefit of mankind, sometimes it will provoke anger. And that is also something that we need to deal better with. Sometimes we try and meet this anger, this anxiety that we see in front of us here. We try and meet that with logical reasoning only. And we know that it's not going to work. We need to find better ways of addressing the anger that's directed towards us, sort of a judo style. So we take that force and use it against, of course, the common enemy, the fossil fuels. 6th out of the 7 deadly sins, gluttony. It's sometimes portrayed as being only about food, but it's really about consuming mass quantities of anything. It could, for instance, be mass quantities of culture, and that, of course, is climate benign. But with a lot of the consumption of food is not. And also a lot of the consumption of food, what you're going to have on your plate at the next meal, is something that we cannot take for granted unless we halt climate change. Because 1 year of drought, 1 year of flooding, that's okay. Farmers will kick back. 2 years, still okay. 3 years or more, a lot of the things we've taken for granted are never going to come back. And that is why also it's so exciting to see how already now geothermal is part of the solution to make sure that a lot of the things that we want to have on our plates and we want to enjoy with our friends can be there in the future as well. This is from Iceland. This is a meeting held, maybe not a meeting, they have a nice dinner amongst friends, heated up by geothermal. All those tomatoes growing in Iceland is thanks to geothermal. Them sitting inside in a nice cozy greenhouse, again heated with geothermal. So you're part even of the 6th deadly sin solution to gluttony. Finally, the 7th deadly sin, pride. I know that not all of us are Swedish, but I am, so I want to briefly mention the Swedish climate target and how that happened. After the Paris Agreement, the 7 parties that were interested in combating climate change in Swedish politics, from the left to the conservatives, got together to decide on Sweden's future climate target. They started out by saying, okay, so how much is Sweden's share of the overall global emissions? Could it be 1%? No, it's less. Could it be 0.5? No, it's less. In fact, it's only 0.15%. That is so little. So that if Sweden were now secretly to just turn off all cameras, to turn off all the engines out there, to breathe in and not breathe out again. If we did that secretly, those CO2 equivalent monitors around the globe would not even notice. Nobody would notice. And then, of course, these 7 parties could have said, all right, let's then focus on something else. It doesn't matter what we do, right? but they did something completely opposite. They embraced the deadly sin of pride. They said, all right, so if we're only 0.15% of global emissions, our only chance of relevance is being so good in combating climate change so that others will be inspired. We're going to be the permanent climate-friendly solutions. We're going to be the global help desk for climate. This is Climate Sweden. How can we help you? That is why Sweden decided on the world's toughest climate targets. It was a 7-party agreement. The 8th party was not aboard, but in fact, the other week they also joined. So all 8 parties in Sweden joined in saying that the only way that we can be relevant is by being something that others can follow. And after that, Finland did the same. The Netherlands did the same. Norway with electric cars and so forth. We are now all understanding that we need to, or we should, and we can use pride as a driving force to combating climate change. And I had to look hard to find examples on how geothermal is currently using pride as something that you're building your story around. And I think I'm ordering this t-shirt. I'm excited about wearing it, but I'm thinking that most of us don't clearly enough show the pride that we feel and the pride that our cities, regions, countries, and companies and households using geothermal should feel when using this abundant, renewable, reliable source of energy. So finally, if Katarina will give me time later when we have a brief discussion, I would love to share a survey that we did at the think tank Fortis about what makes a difference. But in very brief words, what makes a difference and who makes a difference? It's you and I. Let's not wait for others, because that wait we simply do not have the time for. So if you want to see the change, be the change. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Mattias, for joining us today. The speech was amazing. It was really, truly what we needed, but I also think this is exactly what actually geothermal industry needed, because the end, what you finished with, the pride part, is something that I really personally think is something we can bring with us. We need to be proud of geothermal and what it can actually do, and need to market it very much in order so everybody gets to know more about it. So thank you very much for that speech.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I have, of course, a ton of questions, but I'm a little bit curious starting on, like, when you started to prepare this material, what were your biggest surprises when you read up on geothermal and learning more? What were your thoughts when you were preparing?
Well, I'm actually so grateful that I got to speak at this conference, because it really meant a steep learning curve for myself. I used to live in Kenya some years back, and so a lot of my knowledge about geothermal is from there. But since then, technology has moved on, and I'm so excited to see both that it's possible to drill much deeper than before. Also, that with other sources than water, we can get steam at much lower temperature. You can drill at so many different angles. All these technological breakthroughs that have happened or are about to happen means that this is so much more relevant in so many more places than I realized.
Well, I'm a little bit objective here, but subjective, but I agree with you, of course. But continuing on the same track, what do you think geothermal should do more or less or differently in order to be a part of the renewable agenda even more in the future? What's your advice?
I think it's, part of my advice are those 7 deadly sins that I think that we should systematically commit. But also, I always like to, tag on or hang on to a winning team. If we see that it's going a little bit better for some of the other parts of the equation, for solar and wind, for example, let's see what they did well, and let's make sure that we form those relevant partnerships. Because often we see different sources of renewable energy as, competing with each other, which is it's partially true, but also as has been pointed out throughout this day, we see that they go so well together, because geothermal is always there. Geothermal is the base load that solar and wind struggled.
Yeah. What about, your sector there where you are right now in transport? Do you see any connections that can be made that are not made yet within geothermal and transport?
Oh yeah, so much. First of all, we know that we need more electricity for the switch to sustainable mobility. And that, of course, has to be green. Otherwise, half of the point in going electromobility is lost. And in some of the countries where I'm excited about working, the wind is not great. And as we already mentioned, solar is not there 24 hours a day. So the combination with geothermal can really help electromobility forward.
So I hope that you, within half an hour after this is broadcasted, get at least 10 calls from the geothermal community with pitching a lot of ideas here, because I know that there is a lot of knowledge and innovation within the geothermal community that can probably be pitched and talked about together with you. And with your mindset and with your expertise that you already have, who knows what can happen?
I'm waiting by the phone.
Good there. Thank you. Well, Mattias, it's time to summarize this interview. Do you have any final advice or word that you wanted to leave the viewers with today?
Yes, be proud of what you're doing, because nothing beats really digging into and enjoying what we do. If we're proud and enjoy it, we will win.
We will take that with us, definitely. Thank you very much, Mattias, from the bottom of our heart. See you around, and go wait by the phone now because it's calling.
All right.
See ya.